Today, as we come into the conclusion of the Meditation Summit, I'm so pleased that we have featured Jack Kornfield as part of the summit. Jack was trained as a Buddhist monk in Thailand, Burma, and India, and has taught worldwide since 1974. He holds a PhD in clinical psychology and is the co-founder of the Insight Meditation Society, as well as the Spirit Rock Center in Woodacre, California. He's written more than a dozen books, including the classic best-selling book, A Path with Heart, and with Sounds True has published many audio programs, and along with co-teacher Tara Brock has launched a new online awareness training institute. The first online course of the Awareness Training Institute is a program called The Power of Awareness, and the Awareness Training Institute is also launching a new 40-day training in establishing a meditation practice in less than 15 minutes a day. It's called Mindfulness Daily. Jack, we couldn't really have this meditation summit without you. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you, Tammy. Really glad to be talking to you and to all of the people who are listening and have been part of the summit. And I hope that the summit and the practices and teachings have really served the hearts and well-being of everyone who listens.
In talking, Jack, about the contribution that you could make to the Meditation Summit, our team asked you if you would be willing to teach on forgiveness, and you agreed. And really, it's this art of forgiveness that I think is so transformative in our lives and also difficult for many of us. And so I'd love if you could start by presenting how we can really work with forgiveness as something we cultivate on the cushion. How does this become part of our practice?
With pleasure. On the cushion and even more in our lives. Forgiveness is a beautiful practice for the heart and a perfect way to end the series if we consider that the goal of our spiritual life in some fashion is to live fully or to love well or to find a kind of inner freedom, or maybe you could say to come back to our true nature, our Buddha nature, which is loving awareness itself. That's who we are. Then forgiveness is an essential piece of this awakening and liberation and loving well. Without forgiveness, we're chained to the past. If you look at Northern Ireland, the Northern Irish Protestants and Catholics have been fighting for centuries over who did what to whom. In Rwanda, the Hutus and the Tutsis, between the Palestinians and the Israelis, decades of terrible conflict. The Serbs, the Bosnians, and the Croats went to war because it was not possible to find forgiveness. And yet in the end, without forgiveness, we continue to repeat the cycles of conflict and suffering. So that in Rwanda now, forgiveness is being found between the Hutus and the Tutsis. And in Northern Ireland, there has also been a significant shift in the ending of the conflict outwardly and the beginning of forgiveness. The truth is that in human incarnation, we have all been betrayed. We've been hurt. Our trust has been broken. It happens in large and small ways, whether in these great tragedies that I speak of, or just in the day-to-day encounters with family or people at work. And to practice forgiveness and to understand it frees the heart. It's important first to understand that forgiveness is not so much about forgiving another person. It's really for ourselves. It's like the two ex-prisoners of war who met many years later after all their trials were over, and one said to the other, "Have you forgiven your captors yet?" And the second one said, "No, never." And the first one said, "Well then, they still have you in prison, don't they?" Without forgiveness, our heart is hardened and we're imprisoned by the past. And the odd thing is that if people have harmed us or hurt us in different ways or betrayed us, they might be on vacation in the Bahamas having a good time, and we're there still bitter and hurt and angry. Who's suffering? So whether it's in family, around money, in legal matters, in the company, and coworkers, wherever it is, the capacity to understand forgiveness and use it frees you from entanglement and the sufferings of the past. It said forgiveness means giving up all hope for a better past. Whatever it was, it's done, and how are you going to live from this moment forward? I remember learning about forgiveness from several of my teachers and amazing encounters with people. Gosananda, who was a monk that was considered the Gandhi of Cambodia and a very dear friend with whom I lived and worked in Cambodian refugee camps, was the exemplar of forgiveness. In the Cambodian genocide, much of his family was killed, temples burned, so much destruction in the villages, many of the monks and educated people killed. And his response was to take the refugees by the hundreds of thousands who were in really difficult conditions in refugee camps on the on the border, and say, you can't go back to your village now that the war is winding down in the back of a truck or in a bus. You have to reclaim your land with forgiveness and loving kindness. And for 15 years, he led peace walks, walking people step by step back to their villages, and in the front of this long line with a bell and drums would chant, hatred never ceases by hatred, but by love alone is healed. This is the ancient and eternal law. And people would line the jungle paths and the roads and bow down to him and weep as he passed by. Hatred never ends by hatred, but by love alone is healed. I've seen it in the restorative justice movement, in the prison work that I've done, where both the prisoners who've done things, young guys will say, when I was 18 and messed up on drugs, I did some terrible things. But it's 25 years later, I'm not that person anymore, and I just want to ask forgiveness. And I've seen it in so many other really meaningful ways. Can I tell you one more story before we
Of course.
Go into a little more of the teachings? And again, these are kind of remarkable stories, but they remind us what's possible for the heart. I was on the way to my father's memorial in Philadelphia and sat next to Robert Brown, an African-American man, and we exchanged little bits of stories. I told him where I had been and my own training, and it turned out he'd been in India in the State Department for a while, but now he worked in a project in Baltimore and D.C. for young men who had committed homicide. And he said there was one young man, probably about 14, who was trying to prove himself to get into the gang, and he shot another young kid who he didn't even know, was arrested and brought into court and convicted. And on the day that the sentence came down and he was convicted, the mother of the young man who was shot, after the judge said, you've been convicted of murder, she stood up and looked right straight in the eye in this young man and said, I'm going to kill you, and then sat back down. And then he was taken away in handcuffs and put into a juvenile prison. After about a year, the mother of the boy who was killed went to visit him, which kind of confused him, but she said, I just need to talk to you. And she started to visit him and try to understand him. And she also started to bring him things, a little bit of money for things he could buy in the prison and kind of tending him. And over the next 4 years, till he got out, she began to build a regular visits into her life to talk with him. And at the end of those years, she said, you know, when you get out, where are you going to live? He said, I don't know. She said, well, I have a spare room. You know, if you need a place for a little while, you could stay there. And then he said that he thanked her. And then later she said, so what are you going to do? He said, I don't know. I don't have any skills. She said, well, I have a friend who's got a company. Maybe I could get you some job, some kind. She arranged for that. And the young man came out and stayed in her home and went to the company, began to work. And after about 6 months, she called him into the living room. And she said, I need to talk to you. And they sat down. And she said, remember that day in court when you were convicted of killing my only child, my son, for no reason? And I stood up and I said, I'm going to kill you. He said, yes, ma'am, I'll never forget that. And then she said, well, I have. I didn't want a young man who could shoot another in cold blood to keep walking on this earth. And that's why I started to visit you and bring you things and make friends with you and help you to see another way. That's why I brought you into my home, got you a job and a place to live. And you're not that boy anymore. But the thing is, I only had my son, and I've got nobody now. And you're here, and I want to know if I can adopt you, if you would be my son. And he agreed, and she did. And of course, this is an extraordinary story, but what it also points to is that we as human beings in this human incarnation have the possibility in the heart of graciousness and magnanimity and of true freedom, no matter what happens, that's possible for us, just as it was for her. So to understand forgiveness, there are a few other really important things to know. It's not about perfecting yourself or being a certain way. I mean, we've already tried that. You go to the gym, you're on a diet, you have a coach, you do therapy. It's really about perfecting your love. But to forgive needs wisdom and understanding. The first understanding is that forgiveness doesn't mean you condone what happened. It doesn't mean to forgive and forget. In fact, you may say, I will always take care and I will do anything I can to make sure this betrayal or this suffering does not continue, does not happen anymore to me or to anyone else. So you stand up and prevent the harm from continuing. But with that being so, there is a kind of willingness to say, all right, even though I don't condone it, and I may not even speak to that person again, I'm not going to carry the bitterness in my own heart. Secondly, forgiveness isn't a weakness. It actually takes tremendous courage. In the Bhagavad Gita, it says, if you want to see the heroic, look to those who can return love for hatred. If you want to see the brave, look to those who can forgive. So there's a dignity and a self-possession or an inner strength that comes from those like Gosananda walking through the killing fields saying hatred never ends by hatred and leading others back to the place of community and love. There's a dignity and a power to forgiveness in your own heart. It also can't be papered over. You can't just say, oh, I forgive, I forgive. When I first learned it, my teacher said, do this practice of forgiveness for 5 or 10 minutes twice a day for the next 6 months and let me know how it's going. And I thought about it and I said, 6 months, twice a day, that's 300 times. So you do it and sometimes it brings up its opposite, I'll never forgive. Sometimes it brings up all the grief and the sorrow and the frustration and the pain that we carry. And when that's true, you need to hold all of it with forgiveness, including the fact that you can't forgive yet. You can simply set the intention, I intend to work toward forgiveness. And it's a little bit like the man who wrote to the IRS and said, I haven't been able to sleep because I cheated on my taxes last year, so I've enclosed an anonymous cashier's check for $2,000. If I still can't sleep, I'll send the rest. And that's really the way our human heart works. We do it a step at a time, a little bit at a time, and gradually we start to open the gates of suffering, the clenched heart, the holding, the bitterness, and begin to release it. Another important understanding is that forgiveness is primarily for yourself, and you have to forgive yourself. Just as others have been caught in suffering and caused suffering, we too have done this. And you realize, I simply don't want to carry hatred in my heart. It tenderizes the heart to forgive. It opens us again to life. And when we practice forgiveness, it also helps to see, when we can, the ignorance and pain and fear and self-protection and so forth in others. As the poet Longfellow wrote, if we could see the secret history of our enemies, we would see sorrow and suffering enough to disarm all hostilities. So we learn somehow in the practice of forgiveness not to put another human being out of our heart. We might protect ourselves, we might be very wise in that way, but instead of carrying the resentment and being chained to the past, we allow ourselves somehow to let go with forgiveness, forgiving ourselves in things that we need to do, forgiving others. And gradually there's a profound healing that takes place. The Sufi instruction is overcome any bitterness that may have come because you were not up to the magnitude of the pain that was entrusted to you. Like the mother of the world, we are each endowed with a certain measure of cosmic joy and cosmic pain. You are called upon to meet that measure of pain with compassion, with tenderness, with forgiveness, instead of self-pity. And in this way, when we understand forgiveness, we return to loving awareness itself, which is who we really are, which is our true nature. We return to rest in that vastness of heart and mind that is free and liberated, and that is really the goal of, when you talk about having a meditation summit, it's really the fruit and the goal of all of these beautiful practices. How's that sound, Tammy?
I feel ready to do the work.
I'm glad to hear it. All right, then, what we'll do is a meditation for the next 15 or more minutes that takes you through, all of those of you who are listening, that takes you through the 3 directions or dimensions of forgiveness. And remember that this is a practice. It's called practice rather than perfect. So the idea is that you do it and try it a step at a time, and you might do it a number of different times. Repeat it, and little by little the heart begins to open more fully. The pain we carry somehow softens. The ability to move through the world renewed comes back to us. So, for all of those listening and participating, make sure you're sitting in a comfortable way with some ease and alertness. And perhaps begin just by closing your eyes and tuning in to your own breath and body with a loving awareness, just where you are. And you can notice the mystery of your body breathing. You can notice the moods of your heart right now, and the state of your mind, all with loving awareness. And now to begin the 3 directions of forgiveness. First, and you can follow along as a guided meditation. First, there are many ways in which I have hurt or harmed others, betrayed them, abandoned them, caused them pain or suffering, knowingly or unknowingly. I remember these now and feel the pain that I still carry over this. Let yourself remember. And now choose one of these that feels important to ask forgiveness, picturing and remembering the way that you've hurt or harmed or caused suffering to another. And as you remember this and feel the sorrows you carry, then you can softly say to yourself in your own heart and mind, in the ways that I've hurt or harmed you, betrayed or abandoned you, knowingly or unknowingly, out of my pain, out of my confusion, out of my own hurt or anger or ignorance. In this moment, I ask your forgiveness. Please forgive me. Please forgive me. May I be forgiven. Please forgive me. And as you ask inwardly, sense the possibility that you can be forgiven. That as you acknowledge your own pain and hurt and regret and fear and confusion that led to this, that you are worthy of being forgiven. And now the second direction of forgiveness becomes apparent, which is to forgive yourself. Just as I've caused hurt or harm to others, betrayed them, abandoned them, caused them pain or suffering in so many ways, knowingly or unknowingly, so too I've caused harm to myself, caused myself pain, suffering, betrayed myself, abandoned myself. So many times in so many ways, I need to forgive myself. Let yourself consider, as you feel the pain of abandonment of yourself, or betrayal of your best and most deepest qualities, Let yourself choose one circumstance or one thing that you really need to forgive yourself for, just as you ask forgiveness of others. And as you do, and as you remember, feel the pain you still carry from this. And if you wish, you can even put a hand gently on your heart. In the ways that I've hurt or harmed myself, just as I've harmed others at times. In the ways that I've caused pain or suffering knowingly or unknowingly to myself, betrayed or abandoned myself, especially in this way. I offer myself forgiveness. I forgive myself. I hold myself with mercy and tenderness, all of my humanity. And in this moment, I begin again. I forgive myself so that I can move on. I forgive myself. And let the tenderness and the compassion and care, just as you've asked forgiveness, now extend to yourself. Breathe with it gently and feel that you can be forgiven, that you can forgive yourself. It is a healing balm. A gift to the heart. And now the third direction of forgiveness, as you've prepared the heart for this. There are many ways in which others have hurt and harmed us. Just as we've caused suffering to others, each one of us has been betrayed, abandoned. We've experienced pain caused by others knowingly and unknowingly. The suffering of the results of actions of others, deliberate or unconscious. We've all suffered in this way. Feel the sorrows you carry, sometimes very great, from these sufferings, and how they've closed and hurt your heart and your being. And now for this day's practice, bring to mind one particular place where it feels time to release and extend forgiveness. One way you've been hurt and holding to the pain and the grudge and the suffering or the bitterness that has closed your heart, and where it's time to let go and forgive. And as you remember this person and their actions, and see the whole of their incarnation and their own struggles. Reflect. In the ways that you have hurt and harmed me, abandoned me or betrayed me, caused me pain and suffering, knowingly and unknowingly. Out of your pain, out of your own fear and hurt and anger, out of your own holding on and confusion. In this moment, to the extent that I'm ready, I offer you forgiveness. I may not condone what you did. I may choose to protect myself or not speak to you or others again, to protect others. But I will not carry bitterness and hatred in my heart. In this moment, I release you. To the extent that I'm ready, I offer you forgiveness. I forgive you. I forgive you. And feel what this does in your own being, to ask forgiveness of others, to extend forgiveness to yourself, and finally to forgive those who've hurt and harmed you, as happens to us all in this human incarnation. You become a greater being. You become wiser and freer. You can trust that who you are is loving awareness itself, and that no matter what the circumstances of life, your heart and your spirit is always invited to be free, to sing, to move, to express yourself, to start again, and to love.
Thank you, Jack. You know, the three directions that you worked with, I just want to underscore for a moment, going into that first direction of how we've hurt other people. Because actually, as I was beginning the practice with you today, I was all ready to focus on this person who, you know, has relatively recently, in my own view, betrayed me. So I was all ready to go, you know, this other person. And you started us off with how we've hurt other people. And that was so important for me in going into this practice. So I wonder if you can just talk about that and why we start there in the practice of forgiveness.
For exactly the reason that you said, that when we feel the pain of betrayal of another, we get angry, we feel bitter, we feel caught in it. There's a kind of righteousness in it. They've done this to me, and we forget the perspective that in human life, in human incarnation, we're all in this dance of relationship, and that we too have been one who's caused pain and suffering to others. And when we see it and feel it inside, oh, I've done this as well, because we all have, then it starts to soften the heart, and we realize we're in this pickle together. We were born with a body and mind and all these complex human relationships and our fears and confusions and needs and grasping and all of the things that, you know, entangle us. And that it's not just them that need to be forgiven, but we have to forgive ourselves and we have to ask forgiveness. So it softens the heart, and it gives a much broader and vaster perspective of what forgiveness really invites.
And then when we moved to the second direction, and we're working now on forgiving ourselves, what I thought of is how often when there's some way that I need to forgive myself, that's the time when it's the hardest for me to practice meditation and to practice forgiveness. Everything just shuts down, and I can't make that leap. It's hard to make that leap. So I wonder if you could give some advice for people when they really feel unforgiving towards themselves, especially, how to leap over and do the practice anyway.
One of the things that can be helpful, first of all, is to keep it simple and not judge. The thing that we need to avoid in all these meditation practices is using them to judge ourselves. The point is actually to step out of that thrall or out of that construct of self-judgment, self-criticism, unworthiness, and to approach even our unworthiness and our self-criticism and our deadness and I can't do it and I hate it. To approach all that with a tender heart and say, "Oh, I must be hurting today." And when we feel the sense that we are hurting, that's the first step. Then a second thing that people can do, and you can put your hand on your heart when you feel that, "Oh, today is a tough one," is to bring in the image of someone who really loves us, now or in the past. It could be your favorite grandmother or grandfather, or someone who's seen and, cared for you in some way. And imagine them looking at you. Here you are all stuck and knotted up and not feeling neither forgiving nor even very good about yourself and all caught up. And imagine them gazing at you with all the love that they have and all the care and saying, you're worthy of forgiveness. You're worthy of love and care. And taking that in, because sometimes we can't give it to ourselves, but we can remember there is someone or some experience that touched us and remind us who we are even when we forget.
And then, Jack, I'm going to ask you a personal question, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you could share with us a forgiveness challenge that you faced in your life and how that unfolded for you.
Yeah, I faced a number of them. There has been times over the 40 years of teaching when I've been in conflict with some of my dearest friends and colleagues. And I tend to be, just by temperament, kind of adventurous. And if you look at the compass of Buddhist teachings and how they've adapted over 2,500 years, people take different roles. Some are the conservers and they want to keep everything according to the ancient texts and the traditional way of practice and the scriptures and so forth. And their passion is to preserve it so it's not lost. And others, like myself, see that it's always changing, that when these timeless teachings moved from India to China, they mixed with Taoism and then eventually became Chan and Zen Buddhism in Japan, or when they moved to Tibet, they took this whole new flavor of Vajrayana teachings. And I'm interested in what American Buddhism, what Western modern teachings are like. So I've been experimenting, adapting, and we've been at loggerheads at times. And at times I've really felt betrayed, that we've learned things and then they minimize them and turn the other way. And I'm sure they felt the same. And at times it's been really painful. And then at some point, both in doing the forgiveness practice and in having a perspective, I realized that we're actually all part of some larger family. And that on their part, they're holding the piece that has a certain value and that I respect. And that in my part, I'm holding a piece that also is important. But I don't have the right part. I don't have the best part. I just have what I can contribute. So whether it's in that, or whether it's betrayals in my own, extended family, or betrayals about money, I've experienced all those, and we have. There's some way in which when I step back and I see, that's only human. This person is acting out of a lot of fear, and yes, they've hurt me, but underneath was all their clinging and grasping and fear, or their very deep wounds. Or this person was acting because they wanted to get this and do that, and it was like their passion, and they didn't care what happened. And I remember that I have that passion and desire and trying to get things a certain way also. And I start to see, oh yeah, here we are. We're human. We're only human. And then that tenderness comes in. And I remember Ghosananda going through the killing field saying hatred never ends by hatred, but by love alone is healed. Having hundreds and thousands of people walking with him or behind him, chanting that and weeping as they return back to rebuild their lives.
And then, Jack, just one final question. This
Sure.
meditation summit is about helping people deepen and expand their meditation practice. And we've now introduced to our viewers and listeners dozens of different types of practices: Kundalini, yoga, chanting, Christian meditation, etc. And I can imagine some people are confused, and some people are probably excited about a particular practice they want to repeat and go into more deeply. And as somebody who has worked so deeply in bringing practices to the West and quote-unquote Americanizing them, if you will, I'm curious if you could just give a little advice to people about how they deepen and expand and not water down, dilute, and distort their approach to meditation.
I'm not worried about people watering it down or diluting it or things like that. We start where we are. And sometimes you do just 2 minutes, or sometimes it's all you can do to do it on occasion. You know it's good for you, for your body and heart and mind. And so, it's like entering the water, and maybe the water feels very cold, and you go a little bit at a time, and you go, do I want to swim today or not? I don't use it to judge people at all. So that's the first thing, is really that, we're humans, and when you need it, now that you've listened to these and heard these tools, you realize that it's there for you and it's possible. Then when you feel drawn, which people who listened probably already are drawn, either because of their own spiritual interest or equally importantly, because of their own suffering or their own struggles, their stress, their need for healing, or their sense that there's something much greater to be a part of, then what's helpful is to choose a couple of practices. They're really an experiment, and people change over the years, and pick ones that really touch your heart and open your mind. And whether it's a prayer practice or a mindfulness and, vipassana insight practice, whether it's the practice of compassion or forgiveness, whether it's a chanting practice, that which opens you and settles you and brings you back to a place of presence and connectedness and a kind of inner balance. And the point in the end is, while you may weep sometimes because of the grief that you haven't let yourself tend, these are called the tears of the way, it may open you to a kind of deep healing, some of these practices. In the end, it's really about a loving and joyful heart. It's not a grim duty, but to pick a couple, a heart practice and a body or mind practice that opens you, and then do it for 3 months, 6 months, or a year, and let it nurture you. See how it impacts and changes your life. And then if you want, experiment with another or tweak it, change it a little bit. I trust people to find their way in this, because meditation, while it is a science of mind, it's also an art. And it's like planting a garden. Choose the flowers, water, nurture, fertilize, and take these beautiful things that you've been given and let them blossom in your own life.
Jack, thank you so much for being such a good friend to me, to Sounds True, and for being part of the Meditation Summit. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Tammy. It's a great pleasure, and I hope both today's practice and all the things they've done, all the wild practices you people have done over these last, many sessions have inspired you and really give you something cool and fantastic and interesting and deep to work with.